More and more often, clients are coming to us with requests for Antalya or MERSIN. Naturally, the first thing we ask is, why MERSIN specifically? Why Antalya? In other words, what is the client's purpose for buying? Often, people choose Antalya because there's an airport there. So the main reason is to be closer to the airport. There's also the sea there, and it all seems to work out nicely, right? So by buying in Antalya, you can live peacefully next to the airport, and at the same time you have the sea. But in reality, let's start with the fact that the geography of Antalya is such that Antalya is not stretched along the coastline, meaning the coastline isn't that long. And the part of the coastline that does exist is often mountainous. So there isn't direct access to the beach. Basically, the main reason for buying in Antalya, or really anywhere on the Turkish coast, is to have the sea and direct access to the sea, to the beach, right? So you can relax and sunbathe. But when buying in Antalya, it turns out that there is a lot of real estate, but it's very far from the coast, like 1, 2, or even 3 kilometers away. If you compare this, for example, with Alanya, the geography of Alanya is such that the city is located along the coastline, and here the farthest distance from the sea is about 1.5 to 2 kilometers. And even 2 kilometers is already considered far. Anything within 1 kilometer is considered quite good real estate. You can always easily walk to the sea. Yes, the airport is farther away here, but we have access to a second airport, the Gazipasa airport. It only takes 30 minutes to get to Gazipasa airport. And there are many flights to Gazipasa airport, both from Europe and from Istanbul. So many European clients can fly to Istanbul and then transfer to a flight to Gazipasa. Basically, that's how we used to fly to Europe and other countries as well. Moreover, there are changes happening at Gazipasa airport. The airport is developing and expanding. A second terminal has opened, as well as duty-free shops, restaurants and cafes. This shows that development is underway. Accordingly, more and more flights from different countries and cities will be arriving at our airport. And it's just 30 minutes and you're already basically in Alanya. So to sum up, when comparing with Antalya, yes, indeed, you arrive at the airport in Antalya and you are immediately close to the city. But at the same time, every day you spend a lot of time and energy and maybe even money just to get to the sea. In addition, in Antalya, the cost of real estate near the sea is several times higher than in Alanya. That is, it's about 50, sometimes even up to 70% more. Another very common request for real estate on the Mediterranean coast in Turkey is the city of MERSIN. And why is MERSIN such a frequent request here? Because real estate there is relatively inexpensive. That is, it's even cheaper than in Alanya. It's the same sea, you would think, right? Also, the coastline is very long. There are also many new houses, and everything seems to be just perfect. You could say, buy as much as you want, right? So there is a lot of affordable real estate, many developers, and a huge number of offers. So in what ways does Alanya win or lose compared to MERSIN? Let's start with the fact that, first of all, in MERSIN there is currently a nuclear power plant under construction. Of course, on the one hand, this means the development of the city, an industrial zone, and so on. On the other hand, whether you like it or not, it affects the environment. The second point, MERSIN is an eastern city, meaning it's closer to the border with Syria. Accordingly, the population there is somewhat unique, so to speak. So it's not a typical city, not Alanya, it's not a tourist city, it's a typical Turkish eastern city. Many foreigners don't understand what's the issue there, what's wrong with it, right? I mean, it doesn't seem so bad, but if someone has already been to Alanya, if they understand what kind of service there is here, how tourists are treated, what life is like here for tourists and foreign residents, so to speak, then in MERSIN, that's not the case. It's an ordinary Turkish city, and the mentality there matches that as well. So you won't find the kind of service in MERSIN that you get in Alanya. For example, if you want to go into a store and speak Russian or English, it's quite possible that no one will understand you at all. Of course, there are also areas there with more tourists, and maybe people do speak other languages more often, but still the service, the level of service, and the quality of that service really leave much to be desired. And naturally, this also affects property prices. That's exactly why they're significantly lower there. So accordingly, the real estate you buy there sells even more slowly. Its liquidity isn't that high. Moreover, when you buy property on the coast in MERSIN, you kind of end up in the city, but at the same time, it takes you about an hour to an hour and a half by car to get to the city center. In the very center of the city, the real estate is old. In other words, it's old housing stock. There's practically no space left to build new properties. Construction is happening along the coastline. But the coastline, unlike, for example, Alanya, is not as developed. So you don't have such a huge number of well-equipped beach areas, restaurants, cafes, and so on. Of course, there is a beautiful promenade there, beautifully planted trees, walking areas, places to relax, sports equipment, and so on. But specifically, the beach infrastructure is not as developed as, for example, it is in Alanya. So the main population is a huge city. It's a metropolis with many institutes there. I know I've had requests where people specifically wanted to send their children to study there and so on, to open their own business. Yes, this may indeed help when living in this city. But if you want to live peacefully here in retirement or just come for vacations, to visit occasionally or to rent out an apartment, then MERSIN is, let's say, a complicated city and not suitable for those purposes. Besides these two directions, MERSIN and Antalya, we also receive a large number of requests for other cities. These are Istanbul, Bodrum, Fethiye. And often, I'll repeat once more, we always ask at the beginning of the conversation, what is the purpose of buying real estate? In other words, what do you want to get out of this property? Do you want to live here, or do you want to rent it out? Or do you want to come here for vacations and let the apartment sit empty the rest of the time, maybe have relatives come and stay, and so on? Sometimes people buy simply for investment, so that their money isn't just sitting in the bank or in other riskier assets. Here, after all, it's a more secure asset, right? The property is registered in your name and no one can take it away from you. So we always start with this goal, and only after that do we begin to offer certain properties and consider whether Alanya is suitable for this person. First and foremost, we naturally start by offering Alanya since we know it very well and understand that it meets many of our clients' needs. Cities like Bodrum, Istanbul, Kaş, and Fethiye are separate cities, each with its own infrastructure and specific types of real estate. We will try to make episodes and talk about these cities. Subscribe to our channel and stay tuned for new episodes. Now let's get back to Alanya.